So I know how wonderful the postpartum can be. It's such a sacred time, especially, if you have a good birth experience, the days following that are just heaven. There's nothing like it.
So in this episode, Jess, you're going to share with us your story, both
Yeah.
birth and postpartum, because it's very different to mine.
Yeah, I would say a stark contrast to yours.
Yeah.
So I had my first child in Berlin. I was living there at the time with my husband, Andy.
How long had you been there for?
Oh, like 2 years.
Oh, right. So
Yeah.
you'd been there for a while.
We'd been there for 2 years. Yeah, just over 2 years, and fell pregnant by accident.
Ah.
But I'd been through this, do I want children, don't I want children, after my whole life wanting to be a mum. And then I got pregnant, and it was just the most obvious thing in the world that I was meant to be a mum. And I had a really wonderful pregnancy. I got a bit of pelvic floor pain in my final 6 weeks or so. Really wonderful pregnancy. I was planning a home birth, so I had a lot of visits at home with my midwife, which was wonderful.
So how did you, just on that, because we're so starkly different in, I was like, well, I'm always having my child in a hospital. Were you always like, I'm always having a home birth?
Oh, it wasn't until a good friend had a baby a couple of years before me, and she had a home birth. And that's when I became aware of all the statistics surrounding home birth, all of
Right.
and once you enter the world of learning about home birth and also learning about the hospital system, for me, having a baby at home just made the most sense. There was no way I was stepping into a hospital, especially in a country where I didn't speak the language.
Yes.
I mean, my German was okay, but I definitely didn't speak medical German.
Yeah.
So I did toy with the idea of a birth centre, but then I landed on having him at home because it just felt so right to us.
Wow.
So I had an incredible birth. I went from being in absolute denial that I was even in labour to my midwife coming over to check, telling me I had a good few hours to go and, to have a sleep and have a big rest, and that she'll see me in, 10 to 12 hours. She left my house at 5 p.m. and Louis was born at 8 p.m. So
No way.
yeah, she made it back just in time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it went from just very gentle, mild contractions to boom.
We're on.
Waters broke. I was pushing. It was on. It was amazing. And so my first thought when Louis came out, I didn't make it into the birth pool. There was no time. So I birthed on my bedroom floor with the clothes horse next to me. And I just remember the clothes horse being there. It felt so overbearing. But my first thought when Louis came out was, is that it? And then my second thought was, I want to do it again.
Oh my God, you're a psychopath. What?
Yeah.
How amazing.
The thing is, though, I read a lot, I read Ina May's Spiritual Midwifery. I knew what was happening inside my body. I knew that your body is flooded with so many hormones that help with the pain, but that we also need to do things to keep those hormones flowing. And Andy was on board. So he had, all the lights were really low. He was doing all the wonderful things to keep me in a really good headspace. Then my doula came, and I needed her to spoon me in bed because I needed something warm on my back.
On your back.
Yeah. And while she was spooning me and Andy was trying to fill up the pool, my waters broke, and then it was on. Then it was pushing and
How magical.
Yeah. So
that you were so connected to yourself and your body through that experience. God.
Yeah.
I'm almost wanting to, John better not listen to this, but I'm almost wanting to have another child just so I can have that experience, to be so connected to my body through that birthing process.
It was so amazing. So after that, so I had a doula. Her name's Shanae. She still lives in Berlin. She's still a doula. She also offers placenta encapsulation. So once the midwives had checked over my placenta and made sure it was all intact, she chopped it up, put it in a dehydrator, and left. And then she came back the next day, and within, I think with 14 hours after I had Louis, I had my first placenta capsule. So she came back the next day. It was dehydrated. She blitzed it into a powder, put it in capsules, and then gave it to me. I must say though, I did placenta encapsulation with both babies, and if I had a third, I would definitely bury their placenta. But we learn.
Oh,
I didn't know what I know now.
absolutely.
So my postpartum was amazing.
Yeah.
Shanae, my doula, when she came over the next morning, she bought a soup and a smoothie. And I just remember being in bed and, I don't think I'd really slept because I was on such a high.
Yeah.
And Louis had just been on my chest all night. And I just remember having this smoothie and this soup and just feeling so amazing.
Loved up.
So loved up and not wanting her to leave. I just wanted Shanae, my doula, to stay with me forever. So a good friend organised a meal train. So we had meals delivered to us every day for a month by different friends.
Oh my God.
I had no family around, so that's probably worth mentioning. A lot of people, when they give birth in another country, their mum or their mother-in-law or someone will come
over. Yeah.
That wasn't the case for us. So, and we were very okay with that. We were really happy to just do things our own way.
And did Andy go back to work or?
Oh, so he took a month off.
Right.
He took a month off and then he was self-employed as a hairdresser and he was doing haircuts all over Berlin in people's homes.
Oh my God.
So once he did go back to work, he could structure his days so that I don't think he started till 10 a.m. So what we would do is after that really early morning feed, I would give Louis to Andy because I'd been awake all night feeding Louis, and Andy would take Louis and, at first he would just sort of walk around the house showing him the plants, and then as he got older, he would take him to a playground, but he would take him and I would sleep.
You would rest.
And then he would bring him back with a coffee when it was time for Louis' morning feed. And then off he would go to work, but he could still come back, at lunchtime and help me. And yeah, it was just amazing. I was so lucky. And I also had a number of friends that all lived really close to me. This is we were in an apartment, so we didn't have backyards, but that meant that the density of people I had a lot of friends around me.
Close
and
by.
We had playgrounds. We had a playground a block away from us, and we just had a Facebook group, and we would say, I'm going to this playground or I'm going to this cafe or whatever, and we'd just meet each other and help each other.
Amazing. I'm curious about the placenta capsules.
Yeah.
I know a smidge about it, but for others that maybe don't know the benefits.
Yeah, well, we are one of the only species that doesn't eat our placenta after birth. And so a lot of people are trying to bring that back. But, I don't eat meat, so I'm not about to go and eat a piece of placenta. And it's really hard to properly validate this in medical studies, but apparently it helps with recovery, with milk production, with postnatal depression and so many other things.
I've heard it also helps with the iron.
Yeah.
To restore the iron within the woman's body.
So there was one day when I was being a bit aggressive and Andy said to me, have you taken your placenta capsules today? And I was like, oh, no, I haven't actually. And he's like, can you take them?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, whether or not that was just a fluke, we really noticed a difference when I took them and when I didn't.
Okay. It's interesting. And then sort of how was your postpartum journey from there? Like, So Andy sort of went back to work, and then so when did your doula phase out or
okay.
finish?
So I didn't. So she was my birth doula. She wasn't a postpartum doula.
Okay.
And back then, like postpartum doulas weren't really a thing. Shanae wasn't even working as a postpartum doula then. It's really only quite recent that they've gained popularity.
Okay.
But I did have midwife visits. So I think we spoke about this in an earlier episode, but I had a visit from her.
Yes.
I think the next day and then every couple of days for a couple of weeks. And, she would check. I had a tiny internal stitch, so she would check that and, make sure I was doing okay with breastfeeding. And I had plenty of milk. I actually ended up donating some milk. Yeah, I was fine. I was thriving, but about 6 months postpartum is when I really hit a wall. The depletion kicked in.
Yeah.
That's when A Place Like Home would have been really wonderful for me. I didn't need it in that first month after birth. I needed it at 6 months postpartum.
Yeah. And from that perspective of like not struggle in its fullest form, but, in that I'm feeling a bit wobbly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of women that get to that sort of 5, 6 months.
I see it so much in my work because we've got, we're fueled. We think we haven't had good sleep when we're pregnant because our bladders keep us awake.
Yeah.
But it's so different to how much a baby keeps you awake. And, if you're breastfeeding, your baby is sucking you dry, and it's so hard to stay on top of your nutritional needs. Even if you try, it's can be really tricky.
So at that 6 month point where you felt like you were depleted and a bit wobbly, what did you do? Like, how did you manage?
Actually, I don't think I did. I think all I remember is that I nearly missed seeing Paul McCartney, and because I was so tired, I could not fathom the idea of going to a concert with a baby. But we went, and the crowd sing along to Hey Jude was one of the most euphoric experiences of my life. And now we have a son named Jude. So,
after Hey Jude. I love that.
Yeah. I actually can't remember what I did. I just remember I kind of struggled through it.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said in another episode that we did about you just kind of forget too, don't you?
Yeah.
In those particular stages, you just kind of get through it all.
Yeah. We were bed sharing and feeding on demand, and you just kind of you just push through.
You do. And then with Jude, what was that experience? You were back here in Melbourne?
I was back here. So I had another home birth. That birth wasn't as easy. My waters never broke. So he was born on call. So there's a photo of him when his head was born. And it looks like, when a bank robber puts a stocking over their face?
Oh,
that's what it looks like, because the sack of waters is, over his face and he's all squished. And when he came out, my first thought was never again. And then my second thought was, if I have another baby, I'm having an epidural. It was a really hard labor.
Oh, right.
Which, I think there were a few factors there. One being that I had Louis, and I didn't know. He was in that phase of toddlerhood where if you gave him the wrong coloured fork, he would have a meltdown.
Oh.
So I just wasn't sure. I think
that?
I needed him to be asleep before I could properly drop in to the birth. I also don't know that the person I had there as my doula was necessarily a good choice.
Okay.
But yeah, it was, I did it. I had him, my midwife arrived a minute and a half before he did.
Oh my God, you and these close
I know.
Oh my goodness.
And then because I'd had a home birth, I had really similar level of postpartum care. So I had frequent visits. However, I did get mastitis at 2 weeks postpartum with Jude.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was not a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, I had mastitis with Sebastian and I did the full,
Yeah. I mean, I got it a number of times with Louis as well, actually. And it was just, I look back and I was just overdoing it. I was just trying to do too much. And thankfully I respond really well to echinacea. So the minute I could, I was just so lucky the first time I got it. I was telling my mum, I feel like I've got a flu coming on because my body was so achy. I could barely pick Louis up.
Oh.
And breastfeeding was really painful. And she was like, that sounds like mastitis. So I went straight to Ina May's breastfeeding book and read what she said. And she said, you know, echinacea in a really high dose. So I did that. And every time I managed to nip it in the bud before it got worse.
God, I wish I had have known these things.
I actually, just thinking about all of that, going back to how things were after Louis, I do think, because I was reflecting on this a little bit last night because I knew I'd be speaking about it today, and I do think that because I was in a foreign country, away from friends and family, well, I had friends around, but, you know, away from a lot of my friends and family, and birthing at home, so I wasn't in that highly medicalized system, it allowed me to go to a place of awe over the human body, like just complete and utter awe over what happens, the fact that we grow babies and then birth them. And so everything that happened after Louis, you know, like watching your belly go down and watching your boobs fill with milk and all of that was just all part of it. And I was also, I don't want to say I was well researched, but I did do a bit of reading and preparation.
Yeah.
I didn't go into my postpartum blind, and I think that's a really key point.
Absolutely.
Because so many people are so focused on, as you've said earlier, so focused on the pregnancy and the birth that no thought is given to the postpartum, where I had a good idea of what to expect and how to care for myself, even though, you know, I still felt like poo at 6 months postpartum, but I
that
did
was
a good
with
job.
Louis,
Yeah.
And then with Jude,
So yeah, going back to Jude,
hit the same sort of 6 months?
I did actually.
You did?
Yeah, and I think that was just the combination of having 2 children, you know, a different level of community support, because I didn't have a meal train after I had Jude. I had an amazing mother-in-law who would bring me food every time she visited, but moving back to Melbourne was interesting because when I lived here before children, we all lived quite close together, and nobody really had jobs. I did, no, you know, but a lot of people were still studying or working part-time or, and in the 5 years that we were gone, people grew up a lot and they moved further out and they started having families of their own. And it meant that I didn't have that care around me. And what's so sad is that 2 doors down from me, there was a mum who had given birth at the same time, and we just never saw each other. I didn't know until we started bumping into each other at daycare, and I adore her, and we could have been friends this whole time, but we just didn't know that each other was right there. Oh, isn't that wild?
Wow. Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
And do you think that those experiences are what influenced you to then become a doula?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know how wonderful the postpartum can be. It's such a sacred time, especially, you know, if you have a good birth experience, the days following that are just heaven. There's nothing like it. And I actually, with Jude, I had this is probably a really important point for some people. So I had a really easy time breastfeeding Louis. With Jude, I had too much milk. So my breasts were really, really engorged and he had trouble latching, which meant that I was getting nipple damage. And I remember you spoke about curling your toes. I also had that toe curling pain every time he latched on. Horrible. And if I didn't have the hindsight of how easy it can get, I would have quit. I would have absolutely quit 2 weeks in because it was hell. But I knew that it could get easier, and I was really lucky to have a midwife who helped and showed me how to express a little before I latched him on. And I got a lactation consultant in at one stage as well. Yeah. And we were fine. Both children I ended up breastfeeding for almost 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, it's interesting because then with Sebastian, I went into that a lot freer so I did probably the complete opposite. So I, again, didn't have a great experience breastfeeding him, and I really wanted to, like I was almost probably desperate to. But then there was almost this permission slip because I had let go. There was almost this permission slip to be like, Briss, you've done it for 16 weeks. It's not working.
Yeah.
Just switch over to formula.
It's just not worth, as much as I would hate for anybody to ever feel judged by me because I breastfed my children for so long. I just look at what it does to some people's mental health.
Yeah.
And it's just not worth it.
Yeah. So I'm just actually really curious about this, listening to your story, because even though we know each other, all those little details I didn't know. So you having that beautiful experience, would you still have known if a place like home existed? Would you still have thought, I want to go there? I want to have that experience?
Definitely. But I would say for someone like me, it would be the 6-month or the 9-month mark.
Yeah.
Rather than immediately after birth. Because immediately after birth, I was fine and I had Andy at home and it was wonderful, but it was later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we've sort of, my initial thoughts when I had the vision for home, knowing that I was at that 5.5, 6 month mark, knowing that it wasn't just a transitional space between the hospital and you going home to your own home, that it needed to be something that was for the first year after birth.
Yeah. You did ask me and I didn't answer you. You asked if my experience informed my
becoming a doula.
Yeah, which definitely. I just want everyone to feel how I felt. Yeah. And I know that's not possible. The mums I support, their birth is often a huge determining factor as to how their postpartum is. If they had a traumatic birth, then often they are a bit shaken for the first couple of weeks. But oh my gosh, there's just nothing more rewarding than watching someone blossom into motherhood.
I think this is the thing, right? Every mother's experience is so unique.
Yeah.
Just like each child is unique as well. And we're going to talk more about what a doula is, because I was also reciting to you that I had no idea what a doula was.
Yeah.
And when I was introduced to the concept of a doula, I actually learnt of a doula through some beautiful Jewish friends of mine. So I actually just thought a doula was a cultural Jewish thing.
Well, because there is that beautiful program that exists in Melbourne where Jewish women help each other out after they have babies. So it makes sense that your brain went there.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for sharing your story.
My
Jess,
pleasure.
it's really important for us to share both sides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both sides of the coin.
It can be wonderful. You just need to go in with a bit of preparation.
Yeah.
You need to read a breastfeeding book. You need to have a few meals in your freezer or have a meal train set up. Ask a friend to do it for you so you don't feel, there's still this blockage to asking for help in our culture.
Yes.
So getting a good friend to set up a meal train for you rather than, because people want to help. They just don't know how.
How to.
So you end up with 20,000 baby blankets or bibs or booties that you don't need. Or you end up with meals.
Yeah. And I have been guilty of it as well, that previously I would go in saying, what can I do for you?
Yeah.
And I think that half the time the mother doesn't even know what you can do.
And by the time she asks, she could have done it herself.
And there's that guilt of saying, oh, could you come and do my laundry? Or could you just cook a meal for me?
No one's going to ask you to come and do their laundry.
No one's going to do it. So you've just got to
drop a meal on their porch and say, hey, there's a pie on your doorstep.
Yeah. 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 Thanks again, Jess. That was beautiful.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.